All right, I'm going to talk about how to install a Tomar vertical 2-light signal using a Circuitron BD-1 detector. So this is the H571 vertical 2-light signal with snow hood. So you can see it's got the hood. Where you see railroads up in the north, northeast, they have these snow hoods over the signal. Some do. So on the Province and Worcester section of the layout, I'll have these signals without the snow hood, and then where it goes around the corner into the extension, which is CSX territory, I'll have it with the snow hoods just to have some differentiation. I really like the detail of these. If you watch my channel, you know I have a lot of Tomar products. I've got the crossing signal, I've got their dwarf signals, I've got one of these right now without the snow hood, and I'll put another one on. And then this is going to go on the yard main track in the CSX territory. So for me, I hook it up where one end of the layout already has one of these without the hood. That as you go into the main line at the end of the layout, you're going into a block essentially, and it turns red. As you leave the block, it turns green. And then on the CSX side, that main line, as you go into that, will turn red, and as you come out of it, it'll turn green. Now, if you had a longer layout or a runaround layout, you would put two sensors at each end of the block. So as you enter the block, it'll turn red. As you come out the other end, it'll turn green. The way I'm doing it is it's sort of one for visual effect. As you start to approach the end of the main line, you're going into a block, it turns red, and it also, as an operator, you know that you're going out toward the end of the layout basically. And then as you pull out, it'll turn green. So I'm only going to have a set of two sensors at each end of the layout to activate the respective lights. So these BD-1 circuit boards are set up to be block detectors, so you could have two photosensors at one end that activate the red as you're going in, and then two at the other end of the block, wherever you want that to be. So as the train exits, it turns green. Or if you enter into the block and then back out, it'll turn green from either end. I'm doing it with just two photosensors because I'm going to go into the main line, hit the end of the layout, it'll turn red, and then as I come out of that block going the other direction, it'll turn green. So it's got good diversity of what you can do with it. It's a simple circuit board. They're great at Circuitron. You can email them. One of the key guys there, Steve, is really good at giving you tips and tricks. Their wiring diagrams are pretty good. I mean, I'm not an electronics guy, but if I can do it, anybody can. So I'll walk you through how I wired it, and then we'll take a look at this signal functioning on the layout. I mean, I like these because they're handmade in the USA. The company is in Washington State. It's all brass. It's just got a nice look to it, high quality, and really small LEDs that have nice light to them. And they come with resistors. So let's talk about the circuit board. All right, let's talk about the circuit board. This is a Circuitron BD-1, which is a block detector, and it's normally designed to have two sets of two sensors. So you enter a block, you cross over two sensors, that'll turn it from green to red, the signal. And then as you leave the other end, you'll cross the other two photosensors, and it'll turn from red to green because you're leaving the block. Or if you're in the block and you back out in either direction, it'll go from red to green. In my case, since I'm using this at each end of the layout, so the main line goes to the end of the layout, it's a point to point. I'm having it so that as you enter the main line toward the end of the layout, you're entering a block, it'll turn red. As you come out, it'll turn green on both ends of the layout. And that's really, it's for aesthetics. It's also, for prototypical, there's a block as you approach the main on either end of the layout. And also from an operations perspective, it gives the operator an indication that they're heading into the main line toward the end of the layout. It'll turn red, so it kind of gives you a signal as to where you are. So it is functional. It's pretty straightforward. I've got it hooked up to a 9-volt battery. I was when I was filming it earlier, I had another 9-volt battery and it wasn't working, and I thought something was wrong with the circuit board, but this battery dropped below 7 volts, so I think it's rated from like 9 to 12 volts, so somewhere in that range. But if the juice is too low, it'll actually keep resetting itself to red. So I've learned that. But this setup with all the spaghetti, it's good to use a breadboard, as they call them, just to temporarily set up your electronics to test everything before you go and solder it up, obviously. So what looks complicated, it really isn't. There's just a lot of alligator clip wires to show you. And I always do this. I bench test any circuit board before I go ahead and put the time and effort into putting it under the layout. But essentially, there's 2 photosensors here. So the train is going to approach from this direction. It's going to enter the block, and you'll see that LED turned red. Now as it leaves the block, it goes back to green. Now what happens with this particular board is when you turn off the power to the layout, and then there's a capacitor, so after a while, if you turn the power back on to the layout, it defaults to red, which is prototypical. Any signal will default to red if there's a fault. So there's a way to use a diode to actually put a push button on the fascia so that you can reset all the signals to green when you start an operating session. That's what I've done on my layout, and I'll show you how that works. So let's go through what's going on here. So the power input is here. It's just obviously positive, negative. It's coming off the battery. It'll be off my 12-volt bus under the layout DC. Always good to use filtered power source. And from here, the hot goes over to the LEDs, and then the negative side of the LEDs are going through a resistor for each LED, the green and the red. And that is the side that is triggered by the sensors. So you see down here you have an occupied and a clear. So the occupied output goes to your red LED. The clear output goes to your green LED through the resistor. And if you get a signal, particularly Tomar, it'll come with the correct resistors, so you don't have to worry about trying to figure that out. But you definitely need those, or you'll blow out these LEDs. So you've got the occupied and clear feeding into the LEDs. You've got the hot, which just jumps. They're both sharing the hot. And then here's where you have your sensors. So there's 3 outputs here. One is SS, which is signal set, I believe. And the one in the middle, you gotta look at it, is SR, which is signal reset, and then SD, which is signal drive. So the signal set, follow the white, it goes to the second photosensor. The one that you approach first goes second. The signal reset goes to the first sensor here. And then the signal drive is going to both of the other leads on the photosensors. So what that does then is when you go over the first sensor and then the second sensor, you can see the lights here as each sensor gets activated. So we go through it, we're on red, we back out of the block, we're green. And these are photosensors. Now what comes with this BD-1 are the really small photosensors, which are nice because you can hide them behind the ties. These I just had, they're larger, but they work for testing purposes. There are sensitivity knobs here, which basically if you dial them all the way up until it activates and then dial back a little bit, that pretty much sets your sensitivity. Well, because when it's red, it's on. You don't want it to be on. So depending on the light, and they're pretty good. They handle a good variation of light before you have to readjust them. Or I never really have to readjust mine. So you go into the block, you come out of the block. Now the last piece is, and I got this from Circuitron, so you can trust me on this. The SR, or the signal reset, you can put a diode with the silver collar furthest away from the board on the signal reset, and then have that go to a momentary single pull, single throw button. So again, when you start the layout, everything's going to come on red. All your signals will be red, and you can wire them all to this one signal reset, and then that will feed to the negative feed. So the momentary button will give a little burst of negative feed through this diode into the signal reset on each of your Circuitron circuits. So you can just have one negative feed that goes into a single pole, single throw momentary button, and then that feeds off into each of the BD-1s that you have in the layout through a diode into the signal reset, if that makes sense. So let me show you what I mean. So you turn on the layout and the signal's red. All your signals are red if you have multiple of these. You hit that reset button and it gives that momentary negative through the diode into the signal reset, and boom, everything's green. So when I turn on my layout, I hit that button on the fascia and everything turns green, goes from red to green. Otherwise you got to roll a car through the sensors, and you don't want to do that. So this is a key feature. It's really easy to do. If it's red, you hit that reset button, it goes to green. So I would do that. I would recommend doing that. That's pretty much it for the wiring. Obviously leave questions in the comments, because I know this is, looking at it, it's not organized. It's maybe difficult to follow, but it's really pretty simple in terms of how it's wired. So let's we'll get into next actually putting this signal on the layout. I've got the sensors already in the track, and I'll talk about those as well as show you this thing working. Okay, so here's the Tomar signal out of the package. And they give you a little extra length on the ladder depending on how you want to mount the base. Like I'll just mount this flush and cut the ladder. You know, you might want to put a box. Some of these signals are on a kind of an elevated box. I'm just going to put it down flush, and I'll just take some nippers and cut that ladder off. It's all brass. Nice flat black paint on the face there. And you've got 3 wires. On here it's showing 4 because this is wiring for if you have a yellow light. This has just a green and a red light. So the way you wire this, they give you 2 resistors, one for each LED, and what they call the common is positive, and then the resistors would go in the negative line for each of the colors. So you would have you would put this white to your positive, and then the red for the red light has a resistor, and then that goes to the negative, which is basically the output on that circuit board that I showed you. So that's the for the green, for the red it would be the occupied output, and for the green it would be the clear output. So it's pretty straightforward. Just got to make sure you use those resistors, and I will I'll put shrink tubing over them when I solder them in under the board. There's another trick for you. Since the back of these boards have these solder tabs, you really can't put it flush up against the bottom of your layout. You could put spacers. There's a lot of ways you can mount it, but I've just taken scrap styrene and I've made a couple of slots and just slide that right in there, and then I'll just put double-sided tape on the back here and stick that up under the layout. That way I can, if I ever have to remove it, it also gives it nice clearance in the back there. So, you know, it's might be overkill, but I like doing it that way. Here's another thing I decided to do. Since I mentioned it earlier, I thought, well, what the heck, I'll do it. I made a styrene box or platform for this to sit on, so it'll elevate it a bit. Obviously, I'll shape that a bit and paint that silver. But that will give it a bit more of a, I think, a more authentic look. So again, you can mount it flush on its existing platform, or they give you enough room and enough extra ladder to put a bit of a platform there. So that will be much better than it looks now, obviously. All right, so we've got everything wired up under the layout. There's the BD-1, and I used double-sided tape to stick that bracket to the bottom of the layout. And it's wired up pretty much the way we discussed earlier in the video, so that the red wire is for the red signal, and that goes to the occupied out on the circuit board, and then the green wire for the signal is connected to the clear. And there's DC power coming in to power the circuit board, and the sensors are wired to the 3 sensor outputs there, or inputs. That's what all those green wires are. So pretty simple. And the way it works is it powers this signal. So it'll change the plans. I was going to put that taller vertical signal, but the yard clearance is pretty tight. I think they're 2 inches on center, but it was just too tight for my comfort. So I used a Tomar dwarf signal, and I put it up on a scratch built riser, which is just styrene, and I painted that to look like metal, and I'll rust that, it'll look better. But since it's a signal to indicate a block, I wanted it to be elevated a bit. If I were to use these dwarf signals like I've done elsewhere on the layout to signal direction of the turnouts, I would put it lower down, but this one I wanted to be a little bit more noticeable. So the way it works with those 2 photosensors right there, as the train goes into the block, so this is the main line, it turns red, and it'll stay red until you come out of that block, and then it turns green. So we have that one, and on that end, and then going all the way to the other end of the layout, we have one that is a vertical signal, which even if I expand this on left and right, I'll keep that signal. I'll just take down these walls. So that works the same way. You hit the end, you're in that block of the main, you leave, it turns green. So it's great for when I use this motorman. If I'm automating a train, having it run back and forth, when the train hits or approaches the end, before it turns around, automatically with the motorman, that signal will turn red, and then it'll turn green as the train leaves. And then the train will traverse down the layout into the CSX yard, and it'll go down the CSX main, and when it gets into the mainline block there, it'll turn red, and as it turns itself around and comes out, it'll turn green. So adds a little bit of visual interest. The other signal I'm going to put is a vertical Tomar signal right about here. So the same thing, as you approach that end of the P&W main, it'll turn red, and as you come out, it'll go green. So if you're looking at the layout, you'll see a signal there, you'll see one down at that end, which will look nicer even when I expand that, when I widen that end of the layout. And then you have one here in the yard, which is a little harder to see if there's cars in the yard, but it's there. So little by little, we're adding life and light to the layout. We'll end on the inside of the P&W office. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope you found it helpful. Please like and subscribe. Cheers.